Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webcast. I know we have people from all over the world, so good morning, afternoon, or evening, as the case may be. I am going to go through a series of slides that will take a little bit of time, and then we're going to do some live coding and really walk you through the process of building apps that run everywhere. All right, so let's start with the big picture. Mobile is gigantic. Mark Andreessen says mobile is eating the world. And I have a bunch of graphs we could go through. I don't need to really linger on these at all, but they have some amazing statistics about the sort of smartphone usage versus desktop usage, and the fact that as mobile goes up, percentage-wise, desktop is going down. So more and more people are accessing the web and internet services on their smartphones than desktop, and that trend seems highly likely to continue as we ramp up from a small portion of the global population actually even having a smartphone, and ramping up to closer to the 7 billion population of the planet. There's still a ton of room for growth in the smartphone space, and it seems likely, especially based on the quick turnover of mobile devices and people upgrading, on, say, an 18-month schedule average, that people will soon, a bulk of people will have smartphones in their pockets, as opposed to, say, a flip phone or a feature phone. This change, this computer in your pocket change that has sort of swept us really since 2007 when the iPhone was announced. It's disrupting every aspect of society, from entertainment, of course, to commerce, politics, education, healthcare, and so on. I'm sure that at least one of these things has been radically changed for you in the last few years. The way that business is done, especially, is just completely changed. The way that we interact with products and services has completely changed, or is changing at least. Almost any sector you think of is getting disrupted by some upstart that is mobile-first, mobile-friendly type of business. What I think is interesting about this, though, is that mobile is just the beginning. Mobile is really the first killer app of the wireless revolution, which is the bigger underlying trend that's going on here. It's often compared to the Industrial Revolution, this shift, or maybe even some people will say the printing press, but I actually think it's even bigger than that. It's more on par with literacy in general. And I have a quote from a book called The Shallows by Nick Carr, which I highly recommend people read. It's a really good book. I won't go through the whole thing here. You can read it later when you download the slides. But essentially, he says, the Greek alphabet would eventually change the lives and the brains of nearly everyone on Earth. And the key there is the brains part, because experts say that our modern literate brain can't envision or imagine what it would have been like to be pre-literate. In a world where you had no visual representation of a thought. So imagine if there's no writing. You can't imagine what it would have been like to remember stuff before then, or have no way to express your memories or experiences outside of just the oral tradition of telling someone a story. And I have a couple little kids, and I see the way that they interact with devices that are sort of littered around our house. And they're not going to be able to imagine what it was like for, I'm 45. They're not going to be able to even imagine what it was like to have to look for a payphone or sit through an ad on a TV show, or it's just, they're not going to get it. It's just completely different. So this wireless wave is going to broaden past mobile. It's already starting to broaden past mobile, and it's going to sort of envelop all of these aspects of society. So it's really important for us as web designers and web developers to be as close to the front of this trend as possible, so we don't get swept up in it, because things are changing so quickly. It's unbelievable. Now, I think this change that I'm talking about with kids who are being born today or toddlers, I think that the change is going to actually redefine what it means to be human. The notion of being connected to the internet even more closely than we are with mobile devices will change the concept of what it means to know something. What's the point of memorizing something or remembering things in general if we can instantly just call up Wikipedia or Google or whatever the news service is? It's going to change everything right down to our DNA. So I know everybody, this is a grandiose statement, but my intention here is to get people thinking big first before we drill into the sort of minutia of creating a mobile experience today. So this brings up the notion of future-friendly web development. And this is a big deal because things are changing so fast that it's kind of like, how do you decide what to do if you don't know what the environment is going to be when your code actually ships? And I have three things, the three S's that I think you can use as techniques today to actually sort of insulate yourself against the radical change that we're going through and create a better experience for your users now and also better prepare you for the future by making you more flexible. And the first one of these things is smart content. Now, the notion of smart content is basically that your content is probably stored in CMS, and in there, at least back in the desktop days in the 90s, whatever, it was very common since we were just essentially your CMS basically just output content to a particular desktop website. We didn't realize we were making desktop-specific websites, but that's what we were doing. And it was very common for a sort of data entry person to do something like put HTML in the content or line returns or BR tags to push something down on a page because they knew what page it was going to show up on. And they knew that that page was probably going to be at least 800 by 600, certainly, or maybe 1024 by 768, or maybe even bigger. But they were essentially doing layout work in the content, and that has turned out to be a very bad thing. It's polluted our CMSs with layout instructions, and that is extremely limiting when you can't control or you don't know what the output environment is going to be. So you definitely want to, if you have an existing CMS, you want to go through and attempt to scrub out all of that junk. If you don't have a CMS, then you want to make sure not to put junk in it. And this is actually much easier said than done. I make this mistake even to this day. I sometimes make this mistake because it's so tempting to sort of ignore all of the possible places where something can go, and you just want to bump something down to the next line. What's the big deal? But it's definitely a no-no. Every time I do it, it bites me. Obviously, metadata is an important thing. It's very useful, and alternate data is also a useful thing. So if you have content, what you want to do is enrich it with this ancillary information that will allow a third-party developer or maybe another person in your organization, it will allow them to have options so that in the particular client that they're building, let's say they're building like a native iOS app, they can get your content that you've got from the CMS, and they can pull out and they can say, you know what, I need a plain text version of this. Boom, there it is. I need an HTML version of this. Boom, there it is. I haven't got a lot of horizontal space, so I want a short headline instead of a long headline. Or I've got a huge screen that I need to fill, and I need to pull up, I'd like some pull quotes that I can, blow up real nice in the center of the article, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to add metadata and alternate data, different versions of the data, so that people who are building client experiences can have some options to work with. And then finally, in smart content, it's been the case that content management systems have been built based on the container concept. Pages or posts or pages or screens or windows, and they're very they sort of pull the print paradigm into the structure of the database, and that's turned out to be a no-no as well because we don't know, what's a page, what's a column. When you've got a column on, a 3,000 pixel wide display, it's a totally different thing than if you're on an iPhone. So organizing your data and storing it in that way is sort of another form of layout-related instructions, but it's very difficult to get rid of because it's so structural to the database. So what you want to have instead is like the natural atomic unit of your application or service or content. You want that to be, what your table names are and what your entities are, what your objects are. So things like story or post or tweet, things that are content specific, not context specific. So that's a very big deal. When you get the slides and download them, you can go through this next series of slides that I'm just going to blow through real quickly here so we can get to the fun stuff. But these are a series of slides that were popularized by Daniel Jacobson, who was at the time at NPR. He's at Netflix now. So he's a person who knows a lot about reaching an extremely fragmented constituency. And this is incredibly interesting. It basically follows the life cycle of this story, Proof Faithful, across all the different clients and third-party web apps and websites and radio shows. And as I zoom through these, I can, you won't see it because I'm going to go through it too quickly, but these are all the same story. They're all laid out completely differently. The branding's completely different. The features are completely different. Some of the environments render HTML, some of them don't. Some of them are native iOS, some of them aren't. It's amazing to go through these. It's very, very interesting. And that's the world. That's the way things are going. So, your business or, service or startup might not be there yet, but it's going to be soon. Okay, so there are two topics I want to talk about within this because the concept of doing what I'm suggesting you do freaks out a lot of sort of marketing type people who understandably want to control the brand and they want to present the brand in the best light at all times across all places with the utmost consistency. Unfortunately, that is sort of a control freak nature, which that sounds sort of, I don't mean it in a pejorative way, but like a brand manager is usually a control freak about the brand. That's their job. The problem with that is it destroys your reach because you can only control certain output these days. So you might be able to say, okay, as a company, we're going to release a native iPhone app, and we know it's only ever going to run on iPhone, and we know that there are only iPhones with essentially two different kinds of screens, and we probably only care about the latest one. So we can control that. We can make it pixel perfect, and we can sort of fawn over how precious and beautiful it is, but it doesn't run on Android. It doesn't run on iPhone 4 maybe. It doesn't run on iPads. It doesn't run anywhere. It doesn't run on the web. It just runs beautifully, perfectly on iPhone 5. So what you're giving up there is a massive amount of reach. And in my experience, it's usually better to default to reach than it is to control because we're so used to control, especially coming out of the print world. We're so used to having control that it's not fun to give up. But it's the fact of the matter is if you've been designing for the web, you haven't had control because people could always resize their windows. People always had different size monitors, but it was easy to ignore because most people, didn't run their browser very small on the left-hand side on an 800 by 600 monitor. We all kind of had this collective hallucination that everyone had a 1024 by 768 monitor and always had the window full screen. It's impossible to think that anymore, though. Between smartphones, small tablets, large screens, smart TVs, everything in between, it's time to recognize the fact that we never had control over the web, and now we really don't have control. So you might as well go for reach because you can't control anything anyway. The other thing that I want to point out is the spectrum of adaptability versus optimization. These are two opposite ends of the same spectrum. You cannot have both with one experience anyway. Adaptability is, I always use a vehicle analogy. I always think of like a Jeep or a Humvee or a Land Rover, a vehicle that can go on sand, it can go in the water, it has a winch. No matter what happens, you're probably going to be in good shape. You're not going to get stranded. You're going to be able to accomplish your goals in an adaptable type of vehicle like that. The flip side, optimization is like a Formula One racer, which will absolutely kill a Jeep in a race on a very specific kind of environment, a Formula One racetrack. It's like the fastest thing on four wheels, but you put that thing on a beach and it's not going anywhere. So this is sort of a similar concept, but if you think in the digital world, to me this is responsive web is adaptable, and optimization is native iOS or native Android or native Windows Phone. And those are sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. It's like you don't get to have both. So from a strategy standpoint, again, I default to the first one, which is adaptability, because things are just going to continue to change, and they're going to continue to change even faster. So creating an optimized experience, you're running a risk of it just no longer working anywhere. And if you can't think of an example of that, I direct you to Flash. Okay, so that was the first. That was smart content. That was the first S of the three. The second S of the three is self-service APIs. Self-service APIs are critical, especially for large organizations, in breaking down data silos where I work with a lot of large retail organizations, and it's extremely common for them to have 2, 3, sometimes even 4 customer databases that are run by different departments, and they do not particularly get along. They're incentivized to compete with each other and aren't interested in sharing data. And this is a major problem in a mobile world where customers are connected 24/7. They want access to their data. They want to be able to go use a coupon from your loyalty program at the cash register in a retail outlet and see that updated immediately in their application. And if your departments don't talk to each other and the databases don't talk to each other, you probably won't even be able to connect the dots in the back end. So that's a major problem. You are going to have a hard time making it in a mobile world without deconstructing legacy data silos in the back end. And self-service APIs are a way to do that. When I say self-service, I specifically mean that I think it's important for developers to be able to consume the API with virtually no assistance from the API publishers other than maybe some documentation. But back in the old days when I actually used to be a database administrator, you had to have a conference call or maybe even a physical meeting where people would get together. You'd decide what view you were going to build for people, and you'd say, okay, I need these columns. And I'd say, okay, they're going to be read-only because I don't want you to screw up my database. And database administrators were very reluctant to give away the keys to the kingdom. So APIs are a solution for this, and it allows developers to go off and build the experiences that they need without without going through a bottleneck of like a DBA. When I say developers, this could be internal developers, different department. Maybe you've got an advertising department and a product department, and they want to consume each other's data and publish them in different ways. Or maybe you have third-party developers who you want to create a platform and have third-party developers build on top of your data. And by that same token, I think that you should make anything publicly available that you can, because then you could potentially turn yourself into a platform. And Amazon is the most obvious example of this, where they I guess it was 2000. I can't remember now. I think it was 2002. Bezos basically said to everyone, look, you're going to release things as an API internally. We are going to no more meetings. I don't care what transport mechanism you use. It's SOAP, REST. I don't care, but you're going to do it, and no exceptions. And they did it, and it gave them a huge competitive advantage. And then it turned into Amazon Web Services, which is running something like a quarter of the internet, which is just unbelievable. So if you need an example of this being advantageous for an organization, look no further than Amazon. I wish Starbucks would do this. When I did the Jonathan's Card experiment, I guess it was 2010, I had to write a screen scraper that logged in on my behalf into the Starbucks.com website and scraped what little information I could get out of my account in order to expose the balance on the card to the public. And that's just super lame. Like if they would release an API, you could do all sorts of interesting things, giving away coupons on Facebook, and you could do some crazy stuff. Like Starbucks could turn themselves into the coffee platform of the internet if they would release an API of their sales, not sales data, but of at least user data. You should be able to get your own data. Anyway, I won't belabor that point, but self-service APIs are a very big deal in terms of keeping yourself future-friendly. And then the final S is start small. This is similar to Luke W.'s mobile-first approach, but it's a little more radical than that. My concept is that when you have a new project, whatever it is, you need to think about it from the most restrictive environment you can imagine your users on. And for most people, that's going to be mobile. It's going to be sort of modern smartphone, but it could be flip phones if you are if your product or service is going to be, I don't know, in Africa or in some emerging market where it's still very popular to have dumb phones. But it's getting more and more likely that instead of having a mobile experience first, maybe you need to start thinking about a watch experience first. The new Pebble smartwatch, these are Pebble smartwatches, the new 2.0 update opened the platform to third-party developers, and I've been having a ball, actually, writing essentially web services that populate data on the watch. And this is a great example of a place where you need to have clean content in your CMS because the apps are written in C and they don't render HTML, so you need to pass back stuff that has no tags in it unless you want to see angle brackets all over the place. So maybe you're not super interested in Pebble, and they've only sold like maybe 500,000 of them. Maybe you don't care about that slice of the market. But this week, Android Wear was announced. That is going to be the Android platform for wearables, and there have been LG and Motorola have announced devices for this. And it's a different paradigm. It's a card-based paradigm. It's going to be more constrained than mobile phones. It's going to be dependent on mobile phones. And come on, it's only a matter of time before this starts to catch on. Maybe something like Google Glass, okay, that's maybe never going to be mainstream, or maybe it's going to take 5 years before people aren't freaking out about the camera privacy issues. But the watches are going to happen, and they're going to be in the market. They're already in the market. There's a bunch of them in the market already. I don't think any of them have really reached the tipping point, but they're popular, and they're definitely going to be more now that Android Wear is available, and eventually Apple's going to get into the market, of course. So there'll be a time when starting small means thinking about a watch screen before you think about a mobile phone even. Okay, but for now, all we're thinking about is mobile apps. That's probably what's on everyone's mind. So there's 3 kinds of mobile apps. I'm going to go through this very quickly. When we think about mobile apps, we think about either web apps, which are essentially just mobile-friendly websites hosted on a web server, accessed in the phone's browser. Then you've got native apps on the other end of the spectrum, which are compiled binaries written with native frameworks, compiled down to executable code that's installed locally on a device, runs locally on a device. And then you have a middle ground that has come to be called hybrid apps, where you write the bulk of your application with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then you wrap it in a thin native shell that essentially is sort of like a single-site web browser or a custom web browser. So it's still installed locally on the device, but that you didn't really do any programming in the native code. You mostly just did all your programming in probably JavaScript and maybe some HTML and CSS. So I'm always asked, well, which is the best approach? And of course, the answer to that is that it depends on the business requirements of the initiative, the expectations of the audience that you're trying to reach. So maybe you're trying to reach the general public, or maybe you're trying to reach your internal employees, or maybe you're trying to reach business partners. And those 3 groups have very different expectations. And then finally, the goals of the project. Are you trying to make money selling the application, or are you trying to leverage a pay service or something else? So you have to take all those things into consideration. But my advice to people is to default to a web app, which I describe here, the benefits of a web app. And then if you can't do it in a web app, if there's some reason, like say you have to be in an app store, the marketing chief says we definitely need to be in the app store because that's where our users are looking for this, then you can wrap it in a hybrid app and get app store distribution and some light device access to APIs that you wouldn't normally be able to. And as a last resort, you can default to a native app and say, you know what, hybrid's not going to work. The user expectations is that the user interface is incredibly polished and fast and just like beautiful, and it's a complicated app, and maybe you have to sign PDFs with your finger, it's just too much memory for a web app or a hybrid app, then fine, go with native app. That's fine with me as long as you have thought it through and are definitely picking the right tool for the job. When you download these slides, you can look at this chart. This sort of summarizes everything into one bundle of information that you can run through from left to right with project stakeholders, if you like, in the future. But in general, I think hybrid apps are extremely useful. Of the lion's share of applications in the iOS and Android App Store, a solid percentage of them, I'm going to say more than half, maybe up to 60 or 70%, could have been written as hybrid if they weren't. Even Apple takes this approach with some of their core applications like the App Store and iTunes and this sort of thing. So my general advice, everything depends, but my general advice to people is that if you can build your app with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, then you probably should. If you can't, then you probably shouldn't. And there are plenty of reasons why you might not be able to. Maybe you don't have those skills or access to people with those skills. Or maybe, like I said before, it's just too memory intensive and you really have to go straight to the metal with native code and write stuff in Objective-C or Java. But assuming that you can go with a hybrid application, we're going to talk about building hybrid apps. I'm going to actually demonstrate the code for hybrid applications next. And I'm going to use the two most popular tools for that, which are jQuery Mobile for the user interface framework and PhoneGap for the native wrapper. Before I go away from slides, I wanted to just put this up. I'll take questions at the end, but I almost never get to all of them. So if you want to ping me on Twitter after we're done here, then please do. I love answering questions on Twitter. And if you'd like these slides with presenter notes, as well as the example files that we're about to go through, you can just go to that jonathanstark.com/subscribe, and I will send that stuff out later today. All right, great. Enough slides. Let's go on to the fun stuff. I want to jump over to Sublime Text. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to build a jQuery mobile app very slowly, so like in just pieces, and I'm going to use some of the more popular interface widgets that are common to many mobile experiences, and then I'm going to show you how to wrap that as a native application and actually put it on a phone. Okay, so first jQuery Mobile. You can go to jQueryMobile.com and just download. I just download the zip file. It's like a bundle of all the JavaScript, CSS, and images that you need to do this. But when you're ready to go to production, if you want to sort of trim that down and do a very specific download, they have a tool that allows you to customize your download so that it only contains the stuff that you are actually using, which addresses some of the complaints that people sometimes have about jQuery being large or just too, I don't want to say bloated. It's a decent sized library, but you can slim it down by using the custom download tool. Here it is right here, Download Builder. Okay, so once you have that downloaded, that's what I've done here. I've got it downloaded, and it is unzipped. And I've thrown away some stuff. I'll show it to you in the Finder so it's a little easier to get your head around. All right. So jQuery Mobile, I'm using 1.3. I'm one version behind, so it's 1.4 now. But it's just a bunch of CSS, JavaScript. You get the idea, basic library type stuff. If you're familiar with jQuery, which you probably are, it's very similar. It's kind of like jQuery UI, but for mobile, or really for responsive applications. So it's not a replacement for jQuery. jQuery Mobile is built on top of jQuery. All right, so this is the distribution right here, and JQM, this JQM directory right here, is the directory that I am going to work in. Let me mute my phone here because now everyone's subscribing to the downloads and it's beeping like crazy. Okay, So let's see here. All right, so let's look at the very first page. And you can, and I also want you to follow along if you like on your phone or desktop browser. You can go to this URL, jonathanstark.com/labs/JQM, and you can actually play with these. It's the same code. You can play with them and get a feel for it. In case things are laggy across the video, I don't want you to think that things are laggy. It's actually very nice. So you can go to that URL if you would like to play with that while I'm demonstrating the code. Okay. Back to the code. All right, so the first page, what I've got here is a basic HTML5 template, if you will, and it's pretty. Assuming you're familiar with HTML, this is like really nothing interesting here whatsoever. I've got a viewport tag, which is important to put in on mobile so that your screen's not zoomed way out when someone first visits your URL. Then I've got the jQuery mobile CSS included, jQuery itself included, and then jQuery mobile included. No big deal there. So I'll close up the head. Now if you look at the body, there's one big page wrapper. So there's a div that has data role page. And the data role, if you're not familiar with it, is a new thing to HTML5, or I should say data-star, data-anything. Is an HTML5 attribute that allows you to add arbitrary data to your HTML elements without invalidating the markup. So you can still run it through a validator. And jQuery Mobile expects certain predefined terms to show up in data-role. So things like page, header, content, footer, and so on. In this case, header and footer, these things are optional, but content is required. And as I go through these files, we're just going to populate more and more of this HTML iteratively so you don't get overwhelmed by one giant example all at once. You may be asking why they didn't opt to use the default header and footer, or the new HTML5 header and footer elements, and that is basically for so that it will degrade gracefully across the largest number of browsers. The support for jQuery Mobile, the browser support for jQuery Mobile is amazing, and it degrades gracefully down to even really sort of lame phones, if you will. So it's really nice in that way. So this is just a compromise that they made to support those older phones and older browsers. If we look at this in the browser, it's not going to look like much. We'll open. There's my open dialog. There we go. The computer's kind of chugging. In here. And I'm going to show you this. I'll show this to you in a browser. Okay. And this is just static HTML. It's not PHP or Ruby or anything crazy like that. And this isn't going to really look like anything because it's just a skeleton of a page. Well, my computer's really slowing down. It's just going to be basically empty. Wait for that to load. While I'm waiting for that to load, I'm going to open up the developer tools in Chrome so that we see a little bit more of a phone-style view. Well, maybe my browser will just crash. Sorry, bear with me for a second here. Sorry, browser having a hard time. There we go. Sorry about that. We've got a lot of things going on with the computer between the video broadcast and the Skype call and everything else. All right, so opening up the developer tools. And I'm going to emulate an iPhone 5. We'll refresh this. So this white area right here is the page. As you can see, it doesn't look like anything because it doesn't have any content yet. It's just empty divs. So let's go to the next one. I'm going to add some basic elements, and I'll show you the code for that first. What I'm going to do is expand the content here by adding a few things. So I'm adding an H1 tag to the header, and I'm adding a list view with some links into the content, and just a little footer with whatever you want down there. I've just got a link to like another site down there. Put maybe your copyright or whatever you feel like in the footer. And what this looks like in a browser is this. You get this header and footer, and here's your nice formatted list with the rounded corners. It's got a little box shadow. It's got these chevrons. All of this is by default. I haven't written a bit of CSS or JavaScript or anything. This is just magically how it happens. If I click on one of these, they aren't going to go to anything yet because the target of these hrefs is not set. So let me show you that. You can see in these links right here, I've got hrefs pointing to page fragments for about, blog, and contact, but those don't exist yet. So let's put those in. That's what the next example is. So the code kind of explodes a little bit here because I have to put in more pages. I just had that home page, which is still right here, starting at line 11. But I'm going to fold that down, and you can see, well, actually, I'll fold them all. So you can see now I've got 4 pages where previously I had just 1. And you can see I've given them IDs, which the fragment identifiers are going to point to. So when we look at one of these, they're just basic inside. It just got headers and content. They're just like the other one. So when I click on this, if I go to the second example, if I tap on one of these, I get this nice CSS3 animation, slides the page over, and again, I haven't written any code, nothing. This is just automatically the way jQuery Mobile works. So now going back to the list, let's look at the next example where I'm going to add a settings panel. Down here, line 63, you can see the beginning of a settings panel. This is just another page, data role page. This one has an ID of settings. And I give it a header, and I put a couple of buttons in the header. And they're both back buttons. This is, again, these are pre-configured things that jQuery Mobile is looking for. So data rel equals back, and data icon, I can set different icons. So I can start to add preferences declaratively in the markup instead of coding stuff in this JavaScript or in the CSS. So this is very, very web developer friendly, which I think is cool. And so I've just got some basic stuff in this page. But I need to add a link to it, which I did in the home area here. There's this settings button that I put up in the header area, and I gave it a gear icon. So now if we look at this example number 3, you can see I've got this settings icon up here, this settings button up here, and it's got this icon. And I've done practically nothing. I'm just writing HTML. This is like a regular HTML document. And if I click on this, I get its slide animation. It might not look so smooth over the video, but it's very nice. It's got cancel and save buttons. I can enter some information here. It's not going to save or anything. I'd have to write logic to do that, or AJAX to a server, or store it locally or something. But the user interface is taken care of. And then when I hit save or cancel, it slides away and brings me back to where I was. So very, very cool. All right, so now you might have been annoyed by the fact that this footer is like jammed way up here at the top. It's not down at the bottom where you'd expect a footer because there's not enough content to push it down that far. So in the next example, number 4, if you're following along at home, I just duplicate a bunch of stuff on the home page to make that a lot longer. And I add to the footer, I say on that page, I put data position fixed. In fact, I do this on the header and footer for all of the pages. Header and footer data position fixed. So what that looks like when you open it is that the footer goes down where you'd expect it to. Even on a short page, this is just got a teeny bit of content, but the footer's down at the bottom nicely. And if the browser that your user views this in doesn't support fixed positioning, then it just fails over to normal relative positioning, and it still works. It just doesn't show the footer at all times. It would just have it at the end of the content like in the previous examples. So very nice example of degrading gracefully from jQuery Mobile. And then probably most impressively of all these examples is I'm going to add a nav panel. So this is an interesting thing. So in the home page here, the home page div, I'm going to add a nav button to the header. So this would be sort of like your menu, your hamburger menu type of thing. And then inside of this page, I'm going to add a panel with the ID of nav. And that is that corresponds to the href that I gave it up here. So you can see pound nav, and then down here I've got the ID nav. And that's just got a little bit of content in it. And what that looks like when you view it in a browser is pretty nice. I got the nav button over here now. The settings is automatically moved over to the right. And when I tap on the nav button, you get that sort of Facebook slide open to reveal. You can put all sorts of stuff in here. You can click this close button to close it, or you can click on the page somewhere to close it, the peekaboo part. And that's pretty cool. That is, I promise you, that would be a gigantic pain for you to code from scratch. So you get it for free with jQuery Mobile, and it's pretty nice. I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so those are just some very basic examples. You should go to jQueryMobile.com and check out the demos. And there's, they just do a great job. The jQuery team does a great job with education and support and API documentation. It's very good. It's very good. So just go here and check it out. Obviously, in an hour-long talk, we can't go into much more detail than that. Okay, so what we're going to do next is talk about PhoneGap Build. So right now what we have is a web app, sort of trivial little web app. And PhoneGap is this wrapper technology. Let's look at PhoneGap first, actually. PhoneGap is this wrapper technology that there we go. That you can put a web app in, you can embed a web app inside of, and basically submit it to app stores, which sometimes is a requirement. So let me just show you what's involved with that. It's incredibly simple thanks to PhoneGap Build, which is a hosting, sort of a cloud compiler, if you will, for this. And the way I'm going to do that is, well, sort of pre-baked this for us. Now, if you look at this JQM, this is the folder that we just went through, and I took out all the extra stuff and I've created this www directory that's directly based on the final example from the JQM stuff. And so I've got one index file, and if I open it over here, come on. It's going to look familiar. It's the last example that we just looked at. So I've removed some stuff from the directory just to keep things simple, but also I've added this one thing, which is config.html, and this is a PhoneGap thing. It's a little XML file. It's very easy to understand, and it's really a convenience thing, but you're virtually always going to want to use it. So I wanted to actually give you an example. So here you just define some stuff in the XML. Some information about the widget itself, the overall widget, and then name, description, and author. And I just want you to note the name here, JQM Test App, and the description, example application for live demo. All right? So now what I'm going to do, that I've got this little web app. This is kind of like your web root directory. I'm going to zip this up. Now I've got this zip file. Put it on my desktop to make things simple. And I'm going to go to PhoneGap Build. So again, this is a cloud compiler for web apps to convert them into native apps. And I'm just going to upload a zip file. And this is an Adobe product, but you can do one for free, and you can just delete it and replace it or whatever. Or you can pay some ridiculously low price to actually, I think it's $9 a month or something to have a lot more private files. You can do open source apps for free, and also if you don't want to spend $9, then you can also download the underlying open source project, which is Cordova, and do all of this locally on your machine, so you don't have to pay anybody anything. But I promise you that it's a giant pain in the butt to set up your development environment for multiple platforms. But you just have to trust me on that, or you can try it yourself and see. All right, so now I just uploaded that zipped web root directory, and you can see that it pulled out of my config file the name and the description and the other information that I put in there. And now I am ready to build. So I'm going to click that button. And it's a little hard to see because the contrast is low, but it's building iOS, Android, and Windows mobile apps. You can see this story here that BlackBerry, Symbian, and WebOS are no longer supported, but if you do want to use PhoneGap for those platforms as well, you can download an older version of PhoneGap or Cordova, and you can do that as well, but I guess you just can't do it with PhoneGap Build. All right, so now our things are completed here. My iOS one is red because I don't have my my developer key uploaded right now, but that won't affect what we're going to do. And now, if you look at this QR code, I'm going to do something strange. I'm going to show you, I have a webcam pointed at my desk that's looking at my Android phone. This is a live webcam. That's me waving to you with my finger. Hello. Let's see if I can focus this. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open my barcode scanner on the application. I'm going to pick up my phone and point it at this QR code. Okay, so now it recognized the QR code, and it gives me this link to click on. So I click on the link, and it gives me a warning that I'm installing an unknown source. It's not from the Play Store, so I have to say OK. And if you look up at the top up here, you can see that it's downloading. Click it's done. And there we go. JQM test app. Gives me the regular permissions dialog. It's installing. It's installed. Now I can open it. So this should look familiar. This is the jQuery mobile app that we just built. Everything works. The animations are there. So this should be pretty exciting to a web developer because this is a real app. You know, it's not running in the browser. There's Chrome. There's my browser. And now here's the app. You can put icons and all sorts of stuff in the config file. You can set all that stuff yourself. If you look in my application directory, there it goes. It caught up. Directory. It's in here. It's a real app, and you could submit it to the Play Store or to Amazon or what have you. So as a web developer, I find that incredibly exciting because I'm not really interested in learning Android and learning iOS and all this stuff and getting the development environment set up and all that. I want to continue working on my web skills, my JavaScript skills, my CSS skills, because mostly I want to make web apps and websites, responsive web apps and websites, but sometimes you do have to have stuff in the App Store. And PhoneGap gives you a very easy way to make that happen. What's more, I didn't even touch on this yet, but I'll just quickly tell you that in addition to being able to wrap a web app in a native shell, the fact that it's installed locally on the device and not running in a browser gives you access to a bunch of additional features. So you can do things like access the camera using JavaScript. You can access contacts, the file system, geolocation, other media like audio. You can send vibrations. And some of this stuff is coming into browsers slowly, which is really nice. But you can have it right now if you use PhoneGap. Here's an example call. This is plain old JavaScript. This would not run in a browser, but it does run inside of a PhoneGap shell, where you just say navigator.camera.getPicture, give it a success handler, error handler, and some options about the quality and where you want the file to go when you're done. It's pretty amazing. It's not native. It's not exactly native. You're not going to trick people into thinking that this is a pure native app, probably. But there are some really nice examples of PhoneGap apps that create a wonderful user experience that is very cross-platform, adaptable. Could be released as a web app in addition to being in the app stores. It's all about that adaptability versus optimization, and reach versus control. So if you want an example of this, you can look at the Untapped. It's like a beer social network. You can check that out. They did a really nice job on the design. But this is, I think, again, that hybrid apps, just to jump back to slides for a second, hybrid apps are just an amazing way to solve a lot of problems. Things that, if you have a situation where you need lots of reach, and who doesn't, but you do need to be in app stores, you do need some kind of native access to, say, the camera or the file system, then PhoneGap is a great way to go. It's a very active community. It's extremely well tested. It's brilliantly put together. The people behind the project are geniuses. And I could say the same thing about jQuery Mobile. You're not going to write code that's that good by yourself. These are both team efforts. Some of the smartest people in the world are working on them. And it's just really, it's going to be tough. It's tough to beat. If you were an expert at JavaScript, then maybe it would make sense to not use jQuery Mobile. But until that time, then probably using it is a safe bet. There are other similar libraries like JQT or JQTouch, and there are others. But for me, these days, the most flexible way to go is jQuery Mobile and PhoneGap for hybrid applications.
And with that, folks, we are at the top of the hour. So, Jonathan, we're going to say a really big thank you to you for presenting another outstanding webcast for us all and for sharing all your knowledge and expertise.
My pleasure. Thank you.